Hello, everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan. This kind of feels like maybe one of the first normal episodes of this show, or at least in the long run, what this show is going to feel like, because we had a big movie that opened this last weekend. It was in a bunch of theaters. It had a big opening. A lot of people went to see it. It's starting to feel a little bit like old times, and really for the first time in the history of this show on this channel, because Godzilla vs. Kong, after a big international debut last weekend, rolled out in theaters here in North America this weekend, and actually exceeded expectations somewhat. So let's first of all look at the 3-day weekend. Now, this does not encompass all of the box office for Godzilla vs. Kong because it opened last Wednesday. So these are actually days 3, 4, and 5 of its opening. But as you can see, Godzilla vs. Kong, the number one movie with $32.2 million. That is the biggest opening of what they're calling the pandemic era, meaning the biggest 3-day opening for any movie since theaters closed down last year. That's the big story. The rest, we have The Unholy, which was a pretty low marketed horror film coming out on Easter weekend at $3.1 million. You had Nobody very close behind in its second weekend at just under $3 million. Raya and the Last Dragon in fourth place with a little over $2 million, and then Tom and Jerry in its sixth week, rounding up the top 5. But obviously Godzilla vs. Kong is the big story here. So let's break down a little bit about where it stands in context to what's been going on at the box office this last year. And I mentioned the highest pandemic opening. It is number one. So these are all movies that opened nationwide in theaters after they closed down last year. As you can see there, Godzilla vs. Kong easily number one. $12 million above Tenet, although, as I've mentioned before, that Tenet number should be heavily asterisked because Tenet's quote-unquote 3-day weekend opening also included Canadian grosses from the weekend before and preview grosses from the week prior. So that was not the actual 3-day opening number for Tenet. That's just what was reported by Warner Brothers. So Godzilla vs. Kong actually beat that number by an even larger margin if you were to actually factor in the real 3-day opening weekend of Tenet. There you see Wonder Woman 1984 at number 3, right around the holidays. Tom and Jerry earlier this year at number 4. And then the only non-Warner Brothers title, The Croods: A New Age, at number 5 with $9.7 million right around Thanksgiving. Warner Brothers has largely been the studio that is putting its stuff out in theaters, albeit with the exception of Tenet, at the same time on HBO Max, and that is why you see the big numbers there. They have the top 4 wide openings of the pandemic, but also because they were one of the only studios that was actually putting out movies. This is a really interesting look here. This is the top 10 highest grossing movies over the last 365 days. So we're not just looking at the 4 months of 2021, or I guess a little over 3 months of 2021 that we have so far. We're looking at the grosses since theaters closed a year ago. As you can see, Tenet is number one with $57.9 million. It's the highest grossing movie to come out in the last 365 days. Domestically, I should add, domestically. The Croods: A New Age at number 2 with $56.3 million. But look at Godzilla vs. Kong. That's after 5 days. Tenet and The Croods, that's pretty much, The Croods is still picking up a little bit of money at the box office, but that's more or less their final domestic theatrical run. In just 5 days, Godzilla vs. Kong has almost bypassed them. It will pass those movies this week. So Godzilla vs. Kong is going to be the highest grossing movie of the pandemic era. It bypassed Wonder Woman 1984's entire theatrical run in just 5 days. Now, again, these are not apples to apples comparisons. Keep in mind that when Wonder Woman 1984 came out, there were far fewer theaters that were open than are open now, and we were in the midst of a huge surge in pandemic case numbers. There was so much more reason for people not to go out to theaters, and far fewer theaters for people to go out to. So I've seen a lot of people saying, well, Godzilla vs. Kong passed Wonder Woman 1984 in 5 days. Yes, that is true, but the cases were far different. This was really a full-scale return to theaters for so many people. You had entire chains opening that weren't open before. There were far fewer opportunities for people to go to the theaters when Wonder Woman 1984 opened. However, to put in perspective what kind of resurgence we're seeing here, it did pass Wonder Woman 1984's entire gross. So it is actually the third highest grossing film in 5 days of the last 365 days. Wonder Woman 1984 and Tom and Jerry there at 5, Raya and the Last Dragon at 6, Last year's The New Mutants, The War with Grandpa, and Unhinged there at 7, 8, and 9, and then The Little Things at number 10. It just kind of goes to show you how small the box office has been for the past year. So Godzilla vs. Kong is going to be number one when you look at that metric. Warner Brothers, I think, going into the opening weekend, already knew that something was going to be happening with this movie and that perhaps it was tracking to do really well, because Mortal Kombat, which is the next Warner Brothers release, it will also be available day and date on HBO Max. It was slated to come out on April 16th, which is in about a week and a half. And they decided to push that date, and actually it is now coming out on April 23rd. Pretty late in the game to do that kind of a release date change, but at the same time, I think Warner Brothers could tell that perhaps they had something there with Godzilla vs. Kong, perhaps even bigger than they thought, and they wanted to give it a little more breathing room at the box office. So Mortal Kombat will now be coming out a week later than initially planned, from April 16th to April 23rd. We couldn't go a week without changing the schedule. That's just how it works. Once I set a schedule, or once anyone sets a schedule, it's going to immediately change. That's just how it goes these days. When we're talking about takeaways from this weekend, I really think that whichever side you're on, you can take something away from what Godzilla vs. Kong did this weekend to kind of prove your point. If you are a big theater person, I think you're going to say, look at that. Look at the numbers that Godzilla vs. Kong did. In your face, watch movie at home, people. People still want to go to a theater. They don't want to watch movies at home. This is proof that the theatrical market is thriving. And I think that there's definitely a lot of credence to that. The box office coverage that I've read, Deadlines in particular, was very kind of a booyah, suck it, you were wrong, we were right, rah-rah theater thing. But I think on the other side, if you are on the HBO Max side, if you're an executive at Warner Media, if you're someone who likes to watch movies at home, you can take away from the fact and say, see, it didn't kill the theatrical experience. You can offer movies at home the same day that they release and in theaters, and that they can coexist. That's proof that this business model works. So I honestly think that both sides of the argument, the theater-only argument and the streaming service and theater same-day argument, could use this weekend's results to try to prove both of the other side's business models wrong. The problem is that we're never really going to be able to see. We can't solve this equation, because we're never going to know what the variables are, because the one number that would kind of tip the scales either way is knowing how much revenue Godzilla vs. Kong generated for the HBO Max side. If it generated very little revenue for HBO Max, then the theater people would say, well, see, you didn't get much interest there on your streaming service. But if it generated a lot of revenue and signups and subscriptions for HBO Max, they said that it was a very heavily watched movie. Although, again, those streaming numbers are completely context-free. That's why every new thing on every streaming service is always the biggest and most watched thing ever. But if their internal data shows that they got a lot of signups and a lot of people signed on because of Godzilla vs. Kong, then they would say, no, we made a bunch of money also on streaming, so you're wrong. We're never going to know those internal numbers. This is never going to be a debate that is going to be adequately solved, because we will never have all of that information. That's just how it works. That's the frustration as a numbers guy with these streaming services. There are people out there that are starting to do estimated view times and watching minutes at third-party firms that can look at certain resources, but we'll never get the actual numbers. So I think that this has so far proved to not be disastrous for either side. We will see how it goes. It appears that Warner Media and Warner Brothers will be moving away from this strategy in 2022. As we discussed last week, they've cut a deal with Regal for a 45-day theatrical window that you would assume is going to go to all of the other chains. It wouldn't really work any other way. But I don't think that we've got any hard evidence either way that there was one side of this argument that was right and one side that it was wrong. I think there's evidence to bolster both sides coming out of this weekend. Let's look at where this weekend leaves Godzilla vs. Kong on the overall 2021 box office charts. And first of all, let's look at it domestically, and it opened number one. There we go. We have a new number one film of 2021, Godzilla vs. Kong. In its first 5 days, made $48.5 million, almost $50 million in 5 days for the movie. Again, by far the best opening for any movie in the last year since theaters closed down due to the pandemic. It supplants Tom and Jerry, Raya and the Last Dragon down to number 3, The Little Things and The Marksman at 4 and 5, Chaos Walking, Nobody, and Judas and the Black Messiah get bumped down to 6, 7, and 8. The Courier, by virtue of jumping over Boogie, actually stays there at number 9. Boogie goes down 2 spots to number 10, and then Land the Robin Wright film, drops out of the overall top 10 for 2021. So we have a new king of the domestic box office. We talked last week that given the strength of the films that came out around the New Year's celebration in China, Godzilla vs. Kong is not going to be the number one highest grossing film globally of 2021. But let's see where it has moved up on the chart in its second week of worldwide distribution, and it has jumped up a spot. It has now made close to $300 million worldwide at $285.4 million reportedly. Good enough for number 3. We see there a huge gap, though, between number 3 and number 2, and an even bigger one between number 1, which is at $821 million. But that bumps down a Writer's Odyssey to number 4. Endgame from China, not Avengers Endgame, but Endgame stays at number 5. Raya and the Last Dragon and Tom and Jerry both move up one spot. They leap over Booty Bears the Wildlife, which is another Chinese film. New Gods, Nature Reborn stays at 9. Evangelion is creeping up, though, on New Gods. It's at $62.3 million reportedly, so it could jump up there into that number 9 spot, bumping New Gods down to number 10. Speaking of the international box office, there was a story that I saw pop up today that I think warrants discussion on the show because it may change the tone and the tenor of how I choose to cover the box office. This was a story that ran in Variety just today, which reported that the Chinese Film Authority, which is basically the board or whatever you want to call it, the department that oversees all things in China regarding film, especially which movies get allowed to be screened there and which movies don't get allowed to be screened there. New directives have been issued to movie theaters across China in anticipation of the upcoming celebration this summer of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, the formation of it there. And it regards pre-approved films that are deemed by the Chinese Film Authority to promote the Communist Party. These will be required bookings, and this is just a few of what was in the story that was in Variety. Quote, in an official statement, National Film Administration called on film authorities in every province, region, and municipality, every film and cinema company, and every production firm to screen and promote outstanding films that celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party starting April 1st. Such works are, quote, closely focused on the themes of loving the party, loving the nation, and loving socialism, and, quote, sing the praises of and eulogize the party, the motherland, its people, and its heroes. Cinemas must guarantee not only that these films are programmed, but that their screenings are well attended. The new directive calls on all distribution firms, cinemas, and departments involved in screening activities to promote the films via preferential scheduling slots, preferential ticket prices, and other methods. Local authorities should also broadly organize and mobilize party members, cadres, and viewers to actively participate in screenings so as to enhance their social impact. This is a very tricky subject when we talk about box office reporting because we've sort of flirted with this idea when we talked about all of the movies that came out right around the Chinese New Year. Not exactly straight out manipulation, but encouragement, and certainly removing barriers and obstacles for people to go to the theaters. I know many people that watch this show think that the figures themselves were manipulated. I have no evidence of that, so I cannot make that claim. I know that some of the figures that come out of China can't be faked. For example, figures for movies that come from American studios. Those have to go through a very rigorous process. There are laws and financial regulations. Those numbers have to be accurate. But this to me is a little bit different because here we have the government basically saying you are going to show these films, you are going to make sure that people watch them, you are going to make sure that the tickets are low, and I'm sure that as we get into the summer and there are already local releases, Chinese-produced films that are set to commemorate this anniversary, I'm sure that the box office numbers for those films are going to be very strong. And this is where we get into a tricky thing. And I said it earlier this year, we are approaching a very interesting point when it comes to the Chinese box office because for a long time, the strength of the Chinese market was based on a lot of movies that came out of American studios. And, there was a lot of Chinese money that went to that. But over the last several years, China has upped their film production capability. And now the focus of the Chinese film market, not at the audience level, but from the top down, has really been more about movies that are made and distributed and produced in China. And here we have now basically this isn't a leaked document. This is a public statement from the Chinese government saying, we are going to be releasing films that you, the theater owners, are not only expected to screen, but are going to screen, and you are going to make sure that people show up, and we're going to make sure that they make a lot of money, or at least that tickets are priced in such a way that they're going to generate a lot of interest and a lot of revenue. This makes a very interesting case for me when I talk about reporting box office from China, because at what point does it become not really reflective of what the Chinese market is saying and more reflective of what the Chinese government is saying? I haven't made any determinations on this. I certainly read this with raised eyebrows. I'm not shocked at the story, but the fact that this was, again, an official statement with such clear directives was a bit surprising to me. But it's really a topic that I want to broach now, because as we get further into the year, I think it's going to have to be noted when these movies are marked and essentially marked by the Chinese government as movies that are required viewing by part of the population. I think that takes a little bit of the market element out of the show and really the market element out of the box office reporting. And that's really what I'm interested in more than anything. I'm not really interested in reporting what a particular nation's government is interested in their people going to see. I am very much interested in reporting what people themselves want to see, what the market is saying, what audience demand is saying. So this is just a little bit of an FYI, a heads up that we're probably going to be coming back to this throughout the year. And there may be a point at which I decide to asterisk certain numbers and certain results that come out of China. And by the way, it's not specific to China. If there was another country that was doing this, I would do the exact same thing. It's just that, the system is set up in China in such a way that this is just kind of how it works. So take note of that. I'm sure we're probably going to revise this and revisit it later on, as I mentioned, as we get into the summer and as these celebrations ramp up. There may be some figures that I have to sort of add a little annotation to, because I don't exactly believe that they are reflective of what the free market, if you want to call it that, in China is actually trying to say about which films the citizens of the country, are choosing to see of their own volition. Well, we've been talking about the box office comeback. Let's do a flashback now to a time when the box office was also thriving. And we are going back to 1999, which was a key moment in film history. And certainly, at least for people of my age, when I was 16, a lot of these movies were very instrumental in forming just my concept of what I loved and what was possible in movies at that time. This was a big weekend in a big year. The week 14 of 1999 saw the debut of The Matrix. At $27.7 million, this movie revolutionized visual effects. A huge cultural influence, went on to be a massive box office hit, both domestically and worldwide, would spawn 2 sequels. There's a new Matrix film coming this year from Warner Brothers. So that was the number 1 film, but I didn't know this until I was doing the research. At number 2, another big movie from 1999, a very influential teen comedy, 10 Things I Hate About You, opened at number 2 with $8.3 million. Another new film, The Out of Towners, a remake starring Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn, was at number 3 with $8.2 million. In 4th place, the 5th week of Analyze This at week 5, $6.3 million. And, we're now 22 years removed from Analyze This. It's lost on a lot of people just how unique it was to see Robert De Niro doing a straight-up comedy. That really seems to be almost all he does nowadays. He'll do the occasional Scorsese film or drama here and there, but then you got War with Grandpa and Dirty Grandpa and all the Grandpa movies. I think one of the reasons that Analyze This was such a big box office hit was that so many people were shocked to see De Niro doing a straight comedy. So that was number 4 in its 5th week. And then Forces of Nature, starring Sandra Bullock and Ben Affleck. So many things still to come for him, including Pearl Harbor. But Forces of Nature at number 5 the week that The Matrix opened back in 1999. Although there were a lot of other really notable movie moments this week in box office history. In 1968, one of the most influential movies of all time, 2001: A Space Odyssey, premiered. In 1974, Francis Ford Coppola's movie The Conversation with Gene Hackman opened. If you haven't seen that, he made this movie and The Godfather Part 2 the same year, which is stunning because they're both great movies. In 1998, one of the most substantial box office winning streaks of all time, Titanic, was toppled by Lost in Space in 1998. It's actually good timing, and I swear I didn't plan this, but my podcast, All My Movies, is also a YouTube show. It has moved to this channel. This month we're talking about Best Picture winners, and the movie we're doing this week is Titanic. I swear I did not plan this. These two shows, it was not synergy. However, if you want to know more about Titanic, stay tuned on Wednesday, because All My Movies is going to cover that. So that was a big moment in box office history. And then back in 2014, 7 years ago, wow, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, I really think upended the MCU. It definitely threw a narrative wrinkle into a lot of things, including the future of the TV show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But that was 7 years ago that Captain America, the Winter Soldier hit the box office. As always, before we go, I want to look at the streaming charts to see what people are watching at home. And let's start with Amazon. At number 1 is Chaos Walking, which is in theaters right now, but because box office windows are shortened, it is now available PVOD. And while the box office numbers may not have been great, it's number 1. Some people at least that use Amazon are renting it and watching it at home. Raya and the Last Dragon is now available for purchase. I think it's $30, but you can now purchase it. So it is there as a purchase option at number 2 on Amazon. Judas and the Black Messiah, now available premium video on demand. It's at number 3. Minari and News of the World are carryovers from last week at number 4 and 5. The Croods at number 6. The Little Things, another Warner Media title, available premium video on demand, followed by The Father, Promising Young Woman, and The Mauritanian at numbers 8, 9, and 10. Let's see what people are watching on iTunes. At number 1, people are purchasing Raya and the Last Dragon, also popular as a purchase option on iTunes. At number 2, Wonder Woman 1984, the buy-rent window is open, so you can either buy it or rent it. Promising Young Woman at number 3, The Vault at 4, and News of the World at 5. A few kind of seasonal titles. We have Hop at number 6, The Ten Commandments, which is, I always think of around Easter because it was always running on ABC, so a lot of people like to watch it right around this time of year, also Passover. And Risen, which is directly related to Easter, are all 3 on the chart. Chaos Walking, premium video on demand, is there at number 7, and The Croods, A New Age, is at number 10. People either buying or renting that on iTunes. And let's see what people are watching on Netflix. First of all, we'll look at the streaming service overall. At number 1 is the Netflix original series Who Killed Sarah, which is a carryover from last year. It actually has climbed the charts. Idris Elba's Concrete Cowboy, which is being released as a Netflix original, is at number 2. Friends with Benefits at number 3. The Netflix original Bad Trip at 4. Warren Stories, a new Netflix original series, is at number 5. The Irregulars, the Netflix series, is at 6. A Netflix series, The Serpent, is at number 7. At number 8 is a documentary called White Boy. There's also a narrative film called White Boy Rick with Matthew McConaughey that came out a couple years ago. That is the actual story behind that movie. Coco Melon, still sticking around. Kids love that show at number 9. And then at number 10 is a Netflix original movie called Sky High. It is not the Kurt Russell Disney film. It is a different movie. From what I've seen, it is not at all what you would expect if you were looking for that Disney film. So I wonder how many confused kids or parents were clicking on to find the cute superhero movie and finding something very different. And finally, let's look at what people are watching when you just look at the Netflix movies. As you would expect, the carryovers from the overall list, Concrete Cowboy, Friends with Benefits, Bad Trip, White Boy, and Sky High are the top 5. Hop is number 6, so people watching it on Netflix and renting it on iTunes. Sniper, Ghost Shooter is at number 7. Secret Magic Control Agency, which we talked about last week, is at number 8. And then at number 9, 2 library titles, Legally Blonde and Saving Private Ryan, rounding out the top 10. So not as many Netflix originals. It's about half and half. Usually it's a little bit more. But some people go into movies that Netflix didn't make this week. And that pretty much wraps us up looking at the box office this weekend. Godzilla vs. Kong ruling the roost. It will be the number 1 movie again this weekend. No huge competition coming until Mortal Kombat on April 23rd. And then we get into summer movie season. And that's when things are really going to start cooking because we've got some of these bigger movies that were delayed are now getting ready to come out. I am excited to see some of these films. I'm excited to review these movies. I am excited to get back to a theater. It's going to be a few more weeks until I'm fully vaccinated, and I personally feel 100% safe heading back. But once I am, I'm looking forward to getting back to doing that, getting back into the groove. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the channel, and 1 year in, we're just starting to get back to normal. It's been a very interesting year, but thank you to everyone who's hung out with me for this past year, or if you're new to the channel, thanks so much. As I mentioned, don't forget to check out all my movies. We'll be talking about Titanic. That's coming up on Wednesday, and you can also check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. I just opened up a bunch of new stuff for people at the writer level, which is my $5 level. That's the lowest price level there. You get a movie commentary every month. You also get access to the monthly Q&A that's Patreon exclusive. So if you want to check me out on Patreon, I'd love for you to check me out there because we're doing a lot of fun stuff. And thank you for watching here. Stay safe, and I will see you next week. Thanks for watching.